You're not supposed to be digging in the cemetery. I haven't been moving anything. For years living here, I've heard people complain about the cemetery not being taken care of, that the headstones aren't there. Most of the grave markers are still there, they're just buried. It's B1, it's exactly the one I was thinking it would be. A lot of times the only thing left of someone's life is simply the marker on their grave. When this chunk of concrete is the only thing left of someone's life, you should at least be able to see it. Some of these people didn't even exist anymore until I was able to find a death certificate and put a name to them. Almost 1,700 people that are buried here. There's a handful of people that there's any information aside from a death certificate. It's grave B1. It looks like the initials could be maybe like WN, but I really can't read it. So I can't identify this one, but at least I've located it. The just general whole mentality towards people with mental health issues like that back then, they didn't care. You were cast out from society. They didn't want to see you. There wasn't going to be a record of you left. A lot of the history of Northern State was lost, right down to the people. I think people deserve better than that, really.
This shelf is like all of my genealogy stuff. I remember kind of always knowing that my grandpa was adopted. I never heard my grandpa talk about his mom. We had taken my grandma out. My grandma has dementia. She just turned 95. Something came up about my grandpa, and I said, gosh, I wonder what his mother's name was. And she pipes up in the front seat. She sits up, she goes, Lillian Massey. And I was like, okay, I had never heard that name before. I kept coming back trying to find Lillian, and I would search and find nothing. It was familysearch.org. Signed up, logged in, and it pulled up her death certificate. And that was like our first substantiation that she was a living, breathing person. She died in January of 1934. And it said that her death place where she lived was Northern State Hospital. I had never heard of Northern State Hospital. I feel like I've been to every museum that has records from Northern State, just trying to find every scrap that I can find about her. What I've learned since then is that she was just thrown away.
Northern State Hospital was one of 3 mental hospitals in the state of Washington. Northern State began in 1909 as a farming extension of Western State Hospital. At its height, there were 2,300 patients here, so it was very large, and it was a major employer here in the county.
The whole establishment was like a small town. You had your farm, vegetables, there was a print shop. You even had logging, and there were so many buildings, and they were all interconnected. Physicians and a lot of the administrators lived on the grounds.
The campus was designed by John Olmsted and James Dawson, who were part of the Olmsted Brothers architectural firm, and they planned very carefully how they were going to lay out the campus of a mental hospital. And the philosophy of the Olmsted Brothers was that beauty was an important part of healing, and they didn't want it to look like an institution. Northern State, in its era, was considered really the cutting edge of psychiatric treatment, and some of those treatments we don't look upon with favor, or we find that they were excessive.
There really wasn't any psychotherapy, mostly sedation and restraints and electric shock therapy and insulin coma therapy, which I participated in. And then there were a few lobotomies.
Work therapy was considered a really important part of people's recovery. Patients came here with skills. There were carpenters, there were plumbers, there were farm workers, there were women who could sew.
The belief was that you keep people busy. There was a lot of negative connotations, there was fear. People didn't understand about mental illness. I think it was mostly ignorance, but there was a lot of hostility.
The Northern State Cemetery is really one of probably the loneliest places on the campus because it was the people who were generally forgotten. The majority of people buried in the cemetery are people without families who had no one to come and claim them. Northern State did not have an excellent record of caring for human remains, to be honest.
There's a lot of conflict with the cemetery, a whole lot of conflict with the cemetery. And the more you dig in, the more you learn, the more conflict you find. This is all the paperwork I started with for the cemetery. And like here's the original map of the graves that they had. And I taped it together and then I went up there. And this is how I originally started the whole thing. Is I went up there and I found all of the markers that I have in orange and not a single one of them are in this spot. None of them are in this layout. So I'm like, okay, this is worthless. And I even numbered like, some of them go like count up in this direction, then suddenly they start counting up in the other direction. So that's how I started. It's like, okay, I wanted to see where the graves were and find them. That was worthless. And then I just kind of started going from there, making my own. There's the cremated remains buried up there. But I only have records starting in 39 for the cremated remains. I don't have any from 1927 to 1939. They were cremated. They were put in food cans in the cannery. They stored them in the attic and then they buried several hundred at a time. A lot of them were just buried randomly between graves. It was only probably maybe 4 or 5 years ago I really started being more interested in that and photography and checking out the buildings and then learning about the people and just kind of turned into a bit of an obsession. So Northern State had a newspaper they published on the grounds. And this whole thing and that bin are all print blocks that were used in the newspaper. Glass skylights on the top of the 2 most deteriorated buildings up there right now. These are juice glasses that were actually used up there. Winfield Hall, the old nurses' dorm, the big one that they tore down. So this is from Winfield. Copper roofing nails. And I found a spot where I gathered a bunch of those. One of my biggest connections is from working on the campus in one of the old buildings in behavioral health. I was a counselor there, a case manager. And I'd just be sitting in my office with this person that is too high functioning to qualify for any state services or anything to help them, but too low functioning to live on their own and take care of themselves. And dealt with hundreds of people like this. And I'm looking out my window at this huge empty building and I'm just thinking, if there was only somewhere for this person to go. That's what I need for these clients that have nowhere to go, is where I'm sitting right now. Just at heart, I'm a social worker and care about people and think about people a lot and their situation. And it just got to the point where I just got burned out. I got tired of seeing people come through the door, walk back out the door and die. And I have that Facebook group, Friends of Northern State Hospital. And that's my big thing, is it's about the accurate history of Northern State Hospital. Some people want to go looking for the gory details and stuff, but most people want to know what it was. They want to know the history of it. They want to know about the people there. And I do have people contact me all the time about family members and whether they're buried there and any information. I could kind of point them in the right direction.
Lillian didn't know our family when she was alive. Like, she gave birth to my grandpa, and within a couple of weeks, she was back at the hospital, and I don't know that she ever saw him again. Everybody who knew her in life, of course, is gone. She was born in 1900. Lillian was the 3rd. The story was she was put in a hospital and died not long after my grandpa was born. Well, she was put in before he was born, and so his whole gestation, he was in Northern State with his mother, and she was paroled in late May of 1925 to have the baby. The death certificate said she was divorced. The divorce record said that her husband divorced her towards the end of 25, saying that the child wasn't his, and then gave the baby to the Washington Children's Home. She was an inmate at Northern State Hospital because she'd been infected with syphilis. Nobody knew his mom's story. Nobody knew any of this had transpired. Nobody knew she was in a mental institution. She had 2 little girls. Her daughters were 3.5 and like a 1.5 years old. She lost her kids, and then she had this baby that was ripped away. I mean, I think about her being in that place and not having anybody and being alone. She was put there in January of 25 and died there in January of 34 of pulmonary tuberculosis. There's no record of her remains being claimed. Her records theoretically were destroyed in 1984. She had nobody to speak for her. She had no voice. She had no rights. And she was real. She lived, and if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't be here. It's exciting, it's scary, it's a little nerve-wracking, but I don't want to get my hopes up for anything. It would just be really, really cool to find something, anything. I mean, even to see her name written down on something that the writer that held that pen knew her, interacted with her, maybe took care of her, you know. That would be cool.
Welcome everyone.
Hi there.
And then for this, if you just want to put like Seattle, Washington. So we're just going to go page by page, and we're going to turn it like that, okay? If you need any help, we're happy to help you.
It's okay.
It's very, I understand.
It's good, it's just a lot.
Yeah, yeah. What are you feeling right now?
She's in there. She's in there somewhere. I just gotta find her. Oh my gosh.
All right, so we were looking for January 25. Let's go back and find that.
That was when she was admitted.
Okay. March 25, January 1st. Let me just make sure.
There she is.
Oh,
Oh my God. (29-4264) Lillian Hansen from Skagit County. Female, she was 24 years old, married. Her occupation was housekeeping. She was from North Dakota, and she was received January 13th and committed January 13th of 1925. I've never seen that before. No. Wow, within 5 minutes of pulling a box out, there she is. I prepared myself for there not to be anything. So, she was real. This was her parole date of May 27th, 1925, to go give birth to my grandpa. And so the next page was 293. We'll go this way.
Go that way, you got it.
There she is. Returned from parole June 14th. He was born June 9th. He got 5 days with his mother. Oh my gosh,
This
look at
is
this.
the admissions register. And this has a lot more information, okay?
Wow.
1924, we're just about to 19, there's January 1925 is going to start on this page.
There she is. One line sums up 9 years of her adult life. But what's interesting is it says that she was cremated, but it doesn't give a date. It just says January of 34. Everybody that we've asked about the cemetery records say that there's no record of a burial of her remains. Wow. Looks like they're alphabetical. There she is. Yeah, so she was treated with hydrotherapy once, which doesn't sound bad until you read up on it and that they put him in a straitjacket and restrained him in the tub. I just can't imagine that that's the only treatment she got the whole time she was there. Now I want to know, like, where was she? What building? What ward did she go to? All 3 of Lillian's children were alcoholics. They were all cheaters. None of them had good home life. My grandpa didn't beat his kids, but he terrorized them. So that stuff's hard. But when you think about where he came from, family stuff's hard. But if you don't have them, what do you have? Because there's so much we don't know. And this is like the only records receptacle that may have any clues at all. If there's nothing here, then maybe there's nothing anywhere. But I don't want there to not be anything anywhere. I'd like there to be an answer. I'd really like there to be an answer. Realistically, is there one? I don't know. But I'd really, really like there to be an answer. I'm a little overwhelmed right now. Brain's a little tired, but we found her. Now, if we could only find where her remains ended up, that would be really, really cool.
When you spend enough time in the cemetery, you can spot unmarked graves pretty easily. It's a little harder right there. When you first look at it, it just looks like a grassy field. There were about 24, I'd say, that were visible when I started up there. Last time I counted, there's 205 of them that are visible now. And I've located about 600 so far. Oh, nope. But if that's the edge of one, I'll have metal probes. I'll go around and I'll probe in the ground until I find a grave marker. And they'll mark it with a survey flag. So this is one I couldn't find because that one's not in the right spot. It's not in line. These are in line. That also means there's one right there too that's not in line. This one's really close to the surface. What I want to do now is go grab the iPad and look up who that is, and then whoever with these initials are right around that grave number, then we'll figure out whose it is. Arthur. J.A.B. I thought that said J.A.B. James Arthur Britt, died in 1919. 207. There's a 7, J.A.B. That looks like a 0. So that 717 is way out of place. That one shouldn't even be there. James Arthur Britt. Born about 1880. He was a fruit packer. He was a white. He was a widower. He was about 39 years old. That's not very old. From Seattle, and he died of general paresis of the insane, which is untreated syphilis, which is a very large portion of people died from that or tuberculosis. I don't suppose the correct one is right next to it. It's a grave marker right next to this one. How far down is that? So this is a good example of things being out of place. I found every one of these like this. Uncovering a headstone that's been covered in grass for 20 years, it's like, wow, this person was completely gone to history, and now at least there's something that's brought back of them. Most of the people up there, everything about them has been forgotten. There's nothing left.
When Northern State closed, in a lot of ways, people just walked away from it.
It closed 50 years ago. And then the camp is just kind of sitting empty. They repurposed some of the buildings, but for the most part, they've just kind of sat there. A lot of people were transferred to different facilities. A lot of people were paroled. There were a lot of people that had nowhere to go. They just simply opened the door and let them out and just wish them the best of luck.
Some were released to families, and some were simply given bus tickets to Seattle, and they just became part of the unhoused population in Seattle. The thing about Northern State is it's a complicated place, and I think our human tendency is to want to make it either like a utopia that was a heaven on earth, or that it was a house of horrors and a horrible thing, and it was neither because it was just human.
The preservation of Northern State Hospital and just acknowledging the things that happened and the history of it, I think both should exist for not only remembering what we once had that we lost as far as services for people, but also the things that happened that should never be repeated. If you forget those things, sometimes in history they end up happening again.
Every time we go up there, you know, it's like pick up a pebble or an acorn or a pine cone, pieces of glass from some of the broken windows. It's a way to be connected.
Like this one's Gothic style. I'm not sure why they did that.
It's really pretty.
Really cool. I like it.
So are these original?
Yeah. Yeah,
Really?
These are all original. And those are heavy.
Oh my God. One of the old push button light switches.
Those are all original too. And
That's
these
cool.
lights hanging by the cloth cord still.
I think it's beautiful. For me, it's kind of awe-inspiring because hospitals now don't look like this. I just wonder if she was in a frame of mind enough that they would have allowed her to come here. I mean, I hope so. I hope she was able to not just be in a locked ward somewhere. Well, let's go here.
Just looking at that, from what I could say, it's very likely she was in here though. Because it deteriorated. This is when you were worse off, you were in here.
We've known that she was here, but to see those confined spaces, that was hard. Because she didn't want to be here, she didn't have to be here. I just can't imagine what that would be like. You know, you just want to go home to your kids. When I found Lillian's death certificate, then I scrolled a little before and a little back and was just shocked at the number of death certificates that are from Northern State. How many of them are like Lillian that are just gone? And I don't want to let her down. A lot of people may not know that they had family members there. They're dying again to go and get forgotten.